to the Villarreal update with me, Jamie Campbell, provided by Villarreal USA. Big news this afternoon: Quique Setién is no more, at least as far as Villarreal are concerned. The Cantabrian has been sacked after less than a year in charge. He took over from Unai Emery last year after Emery left for Aston Villa in October. And it's been a chaotic ride for Setién. But let's unpack the decision that Villarreal have taken to sack Setién. Firstly, I've got to defend him a little bit. This feels a little bit harsh because Setién has been set up to fail in many ways. This summer, Villarreal lost three of their best players in Samu Chukwueze, Nicolas Jackson and Pau Torres, but they haven't replaced any of them to the same kind of quality. There have been some smart signings: Ben Brereton Diaz, Santi Comesaña and Alexandre Solot, but none of those players are as good as those three who left. And so Villarreal had to expect some sort of drop in standard this year, having decided not to replace the players. Not only that, but they didn't go and buy a goalkeeper when the whole world knew they had to go and sign a goalkeeper. Pepe Reina was so poor last season, and Philip Jorgensen has come in and done a decent job. But if Villarreal are going to go and compete for the top four, or even top 5 or 6, everyone felt they had to sign a goalkeeper and they decided not to. So Setién really wasn't backed in the summer window, and that all comes because the club didn't trust him enough. I think we'll get on to in a little bit. But defensively, Villarreal have been a mess so far this season. 4 games they've played and they've only won 1, losing the other 3 against Betis, Cadiz and Barcelona. But defensively, chaotic, and Setién wasn't able to settle it down. But again, to be expected, they came into the season with 2 defenders who hadn't even met until about a week before the season when Gabia arrived, and Jorge Cuenca has come back into the starting lineup, or at least this is his first real run at centre-back for the first team, having popped in and out here and there previously and spent time out on loan. Raul Albiol didn't come back until the defeat against Cadiz over the weekend, so a completely new centre-back partnership for the first 3 games. And what do you expect? You expect to concede goals when that's the case, and especially when those 2 players haven't even had a pre-season to work together. So some of these issues were just completely inevitable. Although, getting on to the reasons why Setién wasn't trusted at Villarreal, there were also issues where he didn't help himself. As soon as he arrived, he annoyed some of the first team players. There were allegations of a lack of research into the squad, lack of knowing players until he arrived, kind of asking players' names and that kind of thing that annoyed players. But also the approach was so different from that of Unai Emery, who liked a rigid structure in how Villarreal played. The players bought into that hook, line and sinker over the last couple of years. It worked after all. They won the Europa League, a huge title achievement for the club, and then reached the semi-final of the Champions League, came close to winning the Super Cup. The players completely bought into and believed in Unai Emery's system of play. And then Setién comes in, and this is no fault of his own that he wanted to change the style of play. Not all coaches play in the same way, and thank goodness that's the case. But Setién's play really lacked structure, especially defensively. It was kind of all out attack at times, and that just wasn't the way that Villarreal players were used to playing, and they didn't adjust to that brilliantly in the early stages, and that led to reports that Setién will be sacked within a couple of months. Although he did manage to turn it around. And Villarreal, you know what, were one of the best teams in La Liga in the second half of last season, and they came close to recovering the season to the point of reaching a top 4 finish. They didn't. They finished 5th, but it was a very respectable season, given that Villarreal had a change of manager, and the likes of Real Sociedad and Betis, who finished below Villarreal, didn't have to go through that process of change. So yeah, he annoyed some players out through the door. That was clear, and probably some people higher up in the club as well. Like that kind of element of that lacking of trust has been there kind of as an undercurrent throughout the whole of Setién's tenure in charge. Even when he was doing well, there was this undercurrent. The club didn't quite fully trust him. That they wanted to give him time, but they weren't sure that it was going to work out long term. And that is perhaps one of the reasons that Villarreal didn't really back Setién in the transfer window this summer. I can't say that for certain, but it feels like now that Villarreal wanted to wait to see how this panned out in the meantime. And it looks now as if they're going to have to spend some of that money that they saved in the summer window on getting good coaching and promising that coach a decent budget. For me, it feels like Julian Lopetegui is one of the most likely options at this stage. Although that's just going off gut feeling. They'd have to pay him a decent wage, but not a huge one given the kind of lack of success he had, or the short-term spell that he had at Wolves and the kind of disastrous ending to that whole situation. So I don't think Lopetegui's in a position to demand a lot in terms of wages, although it will be a decent wage that he has. But he would demand some spending of money, as we saw at Wolves. Villarreal are actually in a position now where they can promise at least a little bit of money in the January window, given they saved so much and made a huge profit in the summer. They can say to someone like Lopetegui, we will spend a little bit of money in January. So perhaps that benefits them, although it's a little bit unfair, well, very unfair to Setién, who's now lost his job, perhaps as a consequence of not having that kind of money to spend during the summer window. So a bit of both for me on this one. It feels unfair. Only 4 games into the season, he feels like Setién was completely set up to fail this season. It feels like, not to play conspiracy theorist, but it feels like some wanted him to fail. Some wanted the reason to be able to move on from him. And obviously, good timing with the international break now, providing Villarreal can actually get a manager in, given it's a busy return to the season after this break with the Europa League starting and so on. And Villarreal need to hit the ground running after the break if they're going to recover their season. But also, Setién, he didn't help himself in certain ways. And we saw that on the weekend, against Cadiz, a disastrous performance, one that was, created by Alfonso Pedraza's moment of stupidness, a headbutt. But then Villarreal reacted really poorly. There were some rash challenges, they were really physical. You could see players had lost their heads. And what did we see? We saw Setién slumped in his chair at the side of the pitch. That's where players need leadership. That's where Unai Emery, you never saw Unai Emery sitting down the dugout. He stood there on the side of the pitch barking orders from moment 1 to 90. Come rain, hail, or sunshine, he was there, standing there, giving instructions. And not all players like instructions all the time, but they do appreciate the level of detail, the level of leadership. Setién was sat in his chair. There was a lack of leadership. And Villarreal, they crumbled on the pitch with no help from the sideline. And then he was sent off at half-time, Setién. We didn't even come back out for the second half. So again, not leading by example, not going to the change room and saying, listen, lads, leave the referee alone. You got yourselves to blame. You got Alfonso Pedraza to blame. He'll apologise, I'm sure, but we start again now. We get back into this game. No, he was slumped on the side of his chair while Villarreal players are losing their heads, and then he's lost his head himself at half time. Presumably, we don't know exactly what happened, but presumably he's gone at the referee for what was a clear red card decision, and he's even left leadership in the second half because he wasn't even on the sideline. So yeah, I do feel sorry for him. I think that he was set up to fail, but also Setién hasn't helped himself across the course of his time at Villarreal. And of course, you have to give him credit for a good season of last Villarreal in the Europa League as a consequence of his good management last season. We saw some lovely football towards the end of the season. But many of the players who were responsible, 3 of the players who were absolutely key to that good run, were sold over the summer. They've come back into the season. And that lack of quality has shown so far, and I'm sure it'll settle down. But even if Villarreal get a manager in now, it's going to be difficult until January. Although Villarreal's squad is good enough to finish in the top 6, it will be difficult to turn this around, especially defensively. And inevitably, Villarreal are going to have to spend money, be it in the summer, next summer, or earlier in the January window. This isn't a problem that is going to go away simply by sacking a manager. At least that is in my opinion. So there we have it, a full kind of unpacking of Setién's sacking, and Villarreal's search for a new manager now begins. And stay tuned on Villarreal USA, our website, for more updates in the manager search. And if no quick decision is made, then we'll look to do a video discussing the possible candidates. If a quick decision is made over the next couple of days, then I guess we'll be talking about Villarreal's newest manager. So stay tuned. And like I said, head to Villarreal USA for more in-depth coverage of Villarreal in English.